Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the Agnes Grey reading vlog. Today is March 22nd and I am on page 58 of Agnes Grey. I've been doing all my reading for Agnes Grey in our reading sprint so far, and the introduction is really long, but I think it really adds a lot to this book. The introduction spends a lot of time just talking about her life, and later on we get a little bit about her writing process and about the history, because I think realism is such an important part of this book. So I really love that we got some context in an introduction, even though I'll show you. The introduction is so big. Like, this is the entire introduction, which makes sense that it took me 2 reading sprints to read the introduction. But yesterday evening we had another set of sprints and I read the first 58 pages. Oh, I'm enjoying this so much. I think I'm kind of alone in this because I've seen that a lot of people in the Discord didn't enjoy Agnes Grey so much or are not enjoying it. I really love the plainness and the realism of this book. I've been really enjoying how Anne Brontë just writes about her own experiences, and I've been tabbing that as well because I'll tell you a little bit about my annotation process. I have a tab for feminism, I have a tab for realism, for animal symbolism, which I remember it was a big theme in this book, one for quotes and one for class, society and morale, which was something that Lucy made me think of after she finished it, that I definitely wanted a tab for that as well. So far I've only one tab for feminism, which I think is definitely more a theme that comes later in the book, but I have a lot of tabs for animal symbolism, for realism, but also for morale. I was afraid that the morale would be really laid on thick in this book, but I think it's kind of okay. It's not too present, which I don't really like in books when the author is pushing its own moral or religion very hard into the book. That's not that present in this book, and I'm kind of happy about that. There are a lot of scenes about animal symbolism and about how in certain forms of Christianity back in these days animals are seen as beings that are in servitude of humans. One of the parents of the children that Anne ends up being a governess for literally says, let's see if I can find it, and let's see if I can let my cat in. Hey! She was not meowing at my door. I really like how the men of the first family are shown as violent towards animals and how that is expected to later translate into violence towards women. I really appreciate how vocal this book is about that subject. It's not just implied, it's really thoroughly discussed, which I think is one of the most interesting things in this book, because we have this little boy called Tom and he is cruel towards birds, and later Agnes describes how he's also cruel to humans. The mother of the boy who is very cruel to the animals says to Agnes, who is the governess, "You seem to have forgotten," said she calmly, "that the creatures were all created for our convenience." I thought that doctrine admitted some doubt, but merely replied, "If they were, we have no right to torment them for our amusement." And I love how Agnes is a little bit in doubt, even though she is so young. I think she's 19 or 18 years old in the first year that we meet her. She is really quite strong-minded. I think some people have called her spoiled, and even though I feel really sorry for her in the situation, I can see where they're coming from. But I also feel like if you place her in context, because Agnes was raised very comfortably, her mother was from a higher society, and that is beautifully shown when there is need of money and when their mother thinks of what can we do to get more money. Well, women in high society would make watercolors, and that was one of the few things they were like allowed to do and stay within high society. So that is what she figures her daughters can do, until Agnes says, "I can be a governess," which really shocks her mother and her sister, because being a governess is more of like a middle lower class kind of occupation, which I don't know the exact details around that, but it's definitely not in the circles that her mother is used to. So there's definitely some play with class as well. We have the first family who have a trader's background and they are very rude, and it is expected that another family who is of higher birth, they will be less rude. And I love how Agnes is playing with that and how Anne is playing with that, and I know that we get a little bit more of that in the second half of the book as well, because we have Mr. Bloomfield, who is a retired tradesman, and he is incredibly rude, and he is rude in a way that he behaves. I think when you really look at his behavior, if you would write it from his perspective, I don't think his behavior would be that strange. He is just used to communicating with people very differently than Agnes is. Although he he is not a nice man. In a world of trade, him being the boss, this is quite normal behavior for him. He sees his children making havoc, and then he of course goes to the governess and asks, "What are you doing? Why are my children not behaving?" Instead of asking that friendly, he shouts at her. This was Mr. Bloomfield. I was surprised that he should nominate his children Master and Miss Bloomfield, and still more so that he should speak so uncivilly to me, their governess, a perfect stranger to himself. When in society that maybe Agnes is used to, that is something that you would not do, but I feel like if you're in a workplace and if you're the boss, that is something that he would constantly do to the people that work for him. I'm definitely going to put my focus on the whole animal cruelty and the class and morals part of this book, and the realism of course, because I've also seen a few things that really connect to Anne's life as well, mainly because I read the introduction to one thing I of course did not notice the first time reading it, because I did not read the same introduction, was the discussion on money. In the introduction it gives a lot of interesting information on how much a governess needed to be paid, what her salary needed to be for it to be a living wage, and how much she will be paid. And not a lot of them were paid less than a livable wage. Agnes, her first situation is £2 lower than the livable wage, which gives another layer of the way that she is treated in her first position. And her mother really insists that she gets £50 a year for a second situation, which, read the introduction, is really quite a lot for a governess to make, especially for Agnes her age. The fact that she gets another position where she is paid so much and people are of high society, it raises, I think, a lot of expectations, especially for a Victorian reader. I'm curious to see how that develops, because I do remember a little bit, but now that I have all of this context, I would love to see how Anne Brontë is playing with class, because I remember from Tenet of Whitewell Hall, that was one of the major themes, that people of higher class can be worse and ruthless and rude and unkind and just incredibly uncivil, where people of lower class are very kind and well behaved. So I think that was already something that was on Anne Brontë's radar, and I love to see the subtleties within that. I do remember a lot of the animal symbolism, especially in the second half of the book, how that relates to the love interest, which I really enjoyed, and that stayed with me so much. So when we come to that point, I really want to discuss it, so that will be a spoilery part, but just like in my Jane Eyre vlog, the first part of this vlog will be spoiler free, and I'll give you a big warning when I get into spoilers. Another thing I want to do today is finish my chai tea. And I really need to catch up on making some notes, because I'm doing these monthly wrap-ups now and I need my notes, otherwise it's going to be one big rambling fest. That's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to make some notes. In my beautiful Brontë notebook. I did already... Did I already do this? I think I already made a page for Agnes Grey. Yes, I already made a page for Agnes Grey with the way that I want to annotate, but that's definitely not up to date. So I'm going to do that right now, and maybe take a walk today because it's such nice weather. Okay, it's going to be a productive but very wholesome day today, I hope. And I will talk to you when I've more to say on Agnes Grey. So I am now on page 98 of Agnes Grey. I feel like every 50 pages deserves an update for this book because there's so little pages. I believe in the previous update I talked about gloss, and I was curious to see how Anne Brontë would use gloss, because I did remember her showing that being of a good class doesn't necessarily mean, or being of a higher class doesn't necessarily mean that you have better morals. I'm just going to call it the cat kicking scene, which animal cruelty again is perfectly shown as, especially for men, their character. So I think one of the most interesting parts of this book is when Agnes goes to cottages to visit different people, and she really hungers for more intellectual conversation, and she finds that in a woman called Nancy. Nancy is a working class woman who lives in one of the cottages on the estate, and with Nancy, Agnes really has more personal intellectual conversations, and I really like how she explains that even though Nancy is of working class, she is the one with whom she can have actual conversation. The ladies for whom she works, so the ladies of higher class, they are quite frivolous or very practical, and she can't really have a deep conversation with them. So that is, I think, one of the first signs that Anne Brontë used class as a bit of a question mark in her book. So we have two men of the church. We have Mr. Hatfield, who is, I think he is the vicar, and then we have Mr. Weston, who is his curate. I hope I used the right words. But of course Mr. Hatfield has more prestige and Mr. Weston works for him and he doesn't. And through the eyes of Nancy we get to know different sides of them, and Mr. Hatfield, so the man of a bit of higher standard, he treats her very poorly. Mr. Weston treats her very kindly and very understanding, and he is a much more well-behaved human being than his superior. It stayed with me so much. Oh my god, my voice, I'm so sorry. It stayed with me so much the first time I read it, the way they both treat Nancy's cat, and I will always remember this as one of such big symbols. This is all conversation between Agnes and Nancy. One of the things I like most about this book, I think one of the conversations that are most interesting in this book. And about Mr. Hatfield, Nancy says, "And he kicked my poor cat right across the floor." Just a few pages later, Nancy said, "And when the cat, poor thing, jumped on his knee, he only stroked her and gave her a bit of a smile." Get introduced to Mr. Weston as this nice guy. Both Nancy and Mr. Weston are a symbol that class doesn't nearly mean good morals. That is something I want to discuss before I get into spoilers. So this part of the vlog will contain some spoilers because I want to talk about the love interest, of course. So I'm going to take a sip of tea, so you can click away if you don't want any spoilers. Yeah, gonna give you a second. Alright, so getting into spoilers, of course, Mr. Weston, the love interest. I really like him as a love interest, even though I feel like we don't get to know that much about him. And what I like so much about their romance, or how their romance is set up, is that Agnes falls in love with him in an intellectual level first, before she really develops very romantic feelings for him. The first time she meets him is when she hears him preach, and she said, "I did hear him preach, and was decidedly pleased with the evangelic truth of his doctrine, as well as the earnest simplicity of his manner, and the clearness and voice of his style." So she really likes him as a person before they even meet, before she starts to notice any attractiveness on a romantic level. Of course, through Nancy's eye, we get to know that he is a very kind person and that he has a lot of similarities with Agnes as well. Just really enjoy that that is how the romance is set up. It's not very sexy, it's not very romantic, but it feels very true to Anne Brontë's writing, and it feels very true to Agnes Grey as a character as well. If you would put Agnes Grey in a novel like Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights, she would get devoured, because I think she's quite young and naive, and the only kind of love interest or romance that would not ruin her, not in a Victorian way, but like in an emotional and mental way, would be the kind of love where she can first feel attracted to someone as a person and feel attracted to someone's intellect and to someone's kindness. I can definitely see how Agnes in her second position is learning things, is becoming more wiser in what her role as a governess is, especially for the time was one of the most important roles of this book in reflecting what a life of a governess was like and shining some truth on that from a perspective from an actual governess, which of course when this was published people thought it was a man writing about a governess and he was making up all sorts of things, but of course Agnes wrote from her own experience. Like on page 60 she says, "But now I determined to be wiser and began at once with as much form and ceremony as any member of the family would likely require." So she has really learned what it is an employer wants from her, what it is that works and doesn't work. I don't think Agnes is yet developing in the way that she looks at people, in the way that she judges people. I think that's still quite one-dimensional. But again, time, place, age, I think it makes sense. I like that she is developing in her professional sense. Okay, I read more of Agnes Grey. I am now on page 155, so I'm definitely going to finish this tonight. The romance has developed and I really wanted to pay a lot of attention to that this time. Big part of this romance kind of felt out of the blue for me, so I wanted to understand Agnes, her process better. And we have of course Rosalind and her marriage and her flirtations, which I don't know if it really adds a whole lot to the book, her behavior, but I think you definitely get to see a side of Agnes that I feel a bit more critical about, because I feel like Agnes is more judgmental than I remember her somehow. Rosalind isn't a very nice character. Clearly she's not. Agnes is overly judgmental towards her because she gets into a bit of a flirtation with Mr. Hatfield and later with Mr. Weston, which by the way is very one-sided from her point of view, but of course in the end she marries the man that her mother wants her to marry, who I believe in the end we meet her again and she's very unhappy in her marriage. But when she starts to flirt with Mr. Weston, Agnes becomes jealous and she makes her feelings towards Mr. Weston clear for the reader. I felt a bit like, really? Mr. Weston has visited them and Agnes really feels like Matilda is flirting with him, wants him for herself, and then she starts to get jealous and I think it's not her prettiest side. No one's jealousy is their prettiest side, so. "Oh, if he could but know the difference, I would earnestly exclaim, I would not have him see my heart. But if he could but know her hollowness, her worthlessness, heartless frivolity, he would then be safe, and I should be almost happy. So I might never see him more." And the fact that she, without acknowledging her jealousy, just calls her hollow and worthless and heartless frivolity. I mean, she is not wrong, but come on, she is a product of the way that she is raised. She is a product of her time and her environment. And then to be so harsh on her, whilst Agnes is also partially responsible for her behavior in the way that she is her governess. It's her job to learn her certain behaviors. Yes, she met her very late in life, so maybe not full responsibility, but to talk about your pupils in that way, I think is quite bad form. And then later she really admits that she's in love with him and she says, "I could think of him day and night. Nobody could love him as I could." Clearly Agnes is in love. I felt like her and Mr. Weston was a bit of a marriage of convenience, of just being equals, but there's really love as well from Agnes, her point of view as well. And there's one point in the book that is the page that I have annotated for a bit. I got very rudely cut off, but I was talking to you about the entire page. This page, okay, let's go back. Yes, this page I was reading is about Matilda, who Agnes is now solely responsible for. Matilda kills a bird, and of course we've seen that before in the book, and that's not a good sign. And it says something about her character. And Mr. Weston and Agnes meet her after she has done that. And Mr. Weston asks her, "Was it your intention to kill that hare or to save it?" And she later says, "I was rather pleased to see it killed." And her dog has killed the bird, and she says, "Wasn't it a noble chase?" I just love the use of the word noble, because it is seen as noble and like something people of high society do, to hunt and kill for no good reason. And I just love that it is used in this way. She later even says, "It cried out just like a little child." And then Agnes says, "Poor little thing, what will you do with it?" And Mr. Weston fully agrees with her. And of course, we now have a repetition of a situation that we have seen before. In that first situation, Agnes is very emotional. Is she emotional? She reacts all on her own, and a man comes up to her and he agrees with Tom, with the little boy who kills the bird. And now Mr. Weston is here and he agrees with her. And I think this is the point where they become partners, where you can see, yes, this love match is going to work. They are not made for each other, but they agree on the important life stuff, and he is a good man. And I think that is why the animal symbolism is so important in this book, because it confirms the romance. Mr. Weston is tested on certain feelings that Agnes has and certain beliefs that Agnes has, and one of those things is animals and the way you treat animals, how different layers in society treat animals. I think that's why it's so important, because it confirms the romance. I have about 40 pages still to read, so I'm going to do that I think right now. I will talk to you after we've done the live show on Saturday about my final thoughts, and I know a lot of people have given this book quite low ratings, so I'll see if I change my mind on any of this. I think this will still again be a 4-star, just like the first time around. I feel pretty similar about it, although I am more critical about Agnes than I was the first time reading it. Oh my gosh. I have one chapter to go, but instead of reading that, I just need to tell you how adorable it is that Mr. Weston adopted the dog, because I was worried about the dog. I had not forgotten about the dog that Agnes raised and then was disregarded by Matilda, because I talked about how she treated the bird, but not yet about how she treated the dog, because she got a dog and her attitude towards the dog was really like, I only want something from the dog, I'm not going to invest into the dog, even though, you know, being a pet owner, it's a two-way street. And not to Matilda, but definitely to Agnes, because she sees the dog as a companion, but she also nurses it until he is grown, and then the dog is taken from her and is being, I think, sold or given, I don't know, to a rat catcher, which, you know, that's not an ideal life, is it? And then they meet on the beach, also the beach. I think this book is not at all sexy or romantic, but they meet on the beach and he has adopted her dog. I think there are many romantic gestures in Victorian novels, but I have not yet seen something more romantic than a man adopting your lost animal. Dare me and give me an example of something that is more romantic, that is a better example of someone just being freaking awesome. Hello everyone, we are live. Welcome to the second Brontëlong live show, and we're going to discuss Agnes Grey today. Do you all have this edition?
This is my first time reading Agnes Grey. I haven't thought of a star rating yet, but to be honest, it's probably going to be like 2.5 stars.
How about you, Mary? Do you agree with the 2.5 star rating?
I don't agree at all.
I know that.
I originally gave it 3 stars when I finished it, but I finished it a couple weeks ago, and since that time, I haven't thought about it since at all. So it might be around a 2.5 with Lucy as well. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Kara, my channel is Wild Book Garden, and I'm with Mary and Milena. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars.
How about you, Charlotte?
Yes, so I have got it as a 4-star. It was my second time reading it.
I had a companion during the entire stream. She even took my chair, so I decided to sit at my desk. We just finished the live stream for Agnes Grey, and I had a great, wonderful time. Thank you so much for everyone who watched, and thank you to the ladies who joined us. And we had some interesting discussions of Agnes Grey. I think most of it, I have somehow talked to you guys about it already, but I really love to explore the characters more with all of you, because this is a thin book and there is not that much room to get a lot with every character in an individual way, and especially the side characters. We all said that we really love Agnes' mother, and I so agree with that, and I love that we kind of speculated on what her love life would have been like, what her life would have been like after we leave her, of course, in the book, as well for the families that Agnes works for. It's just all very lovely to explore the themes more. I definitely did get a bit more with the animal cruelty part, especially with Matilda, who is the second oldest sister in the second family, and she starts out very interesting, bit of a boyish character, and then eventually she starts to show the same forms of animal neglect and cruelty as the little boy Tom did. I think it was Lucy who said that teaching is connecting with your students and seeing them as human beings. How in the situation that Agnes is in, she realizes that she cannot change anyone in her surroundings, that she cannot make a difference as a teacher, as a governess. And I found that a very interesting discussion, because you can definitely see a certain cycle within that high society, because the children grow up without having very strong connections to either their parents or their governesses. And I just very interesting, and it made this book more layered for me. It's definitely just a 4-star as I imagined it. Placing it where it belongs as Anne Brontë's first novel, it is so admirable, and I can only imagine how many amazing beautiful things she would have written after The Tenant of Whitewell Hall. For me, I think this is more a report of what it was like to be a governess, of a report of what class and morals mean within the world of a governess, than it is a novel. Because I think if you purely view it as a novel, I can definitely see how it's not a favorite, how it falls short at some parts, how we don't get enough time with the love interest. But I think if you view it for a piece of life, for a piece of reality, it has a lot of brilliant elements. I will leave the link to the live show down below if you haven't watched it. There are a lot of lovely people in that live show, so go have a look if you want to. I'm going to start Wuthering Heights in a little bit, and I'm nervous and excited for it. I have read it quite recently. I think I read it in 2019. I really liked it, but I didn't have a big grasp on what I was reading because I hadn't read a lot about the time period yet, and I hadn't read a lot of Victorian novels yet. So I think I will definitely look at it differently this time around, having read more from the Brontes. It was the first Bronte novel that I read. For now, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video.